Hi, everyone on the line. Thank you for joining us today for today's webinar around our industry survey on the real ROI for event keynote speakers. Again, thank you all for joining us. As event planning professionals, I think you all know how much scrutiny budgets are under and how much increasing pressure there is to demonstrate a return on that investment, not just within the event planning space, but oftentimes specifically within that keynote speaking budget line item specifically. And a question that we get a lot from the event planning audience is simply, is it worth it for me to write this check for this keynote speaker? So before we jump in, just by way of some quick introductions here, my name is Brian Carlson. I work at Opus Agency, and sort of simply put, my role is I have a writing background, and I use that experience to help our clients tell the best stories before, during, and after their events, and also to help ensure that the right audiences are hearing those stories. And sitting next to me here is my friend Ken Sterling. A little bit about him before I hand it over for an intro. He is a serial entrepreneur. In his spare time, he teaches at the University of California, so we're hearing from an honest-to-goodness professor today. And this last one came from him. He says his spirit animal is a wolf. So Ken, I think we need a little more background on that fun fact.
Well, I actually thought my spirit animal should be unicorn. My daughter made me take the online test and it said wolf, and I'll leave it at that. Enough about you talking about me, now I'll talk about me. Before we do that, I just wanted to give some thanks to other people who were involved in the project. And in the room with us, we've got Sydney Andre, who is here with Opus. She was a co-researcher on the project and also is emceeing us today. Kyle Crocco also helped with the research, and then the marketing teams at Opus and BigSpeak. So big thanks to you all for doing that. And we're sitting here in a conference room called Paris, and ironically, I think we can use that term, that's where Brian met his wife at a Ben & Jerry's. And one small thing is that we all get these pesky credit card reminders, sign up and get 10,000 miles or win a trip somewhere. And I guess you got something to do with those?
I do, and sorry everyone, that's always kind of my uncomfortable icebreaker at parties, is on my first job out of college was working as a copywriter on credit card solicitations and direct mail, which, again, apologies, but there actually is some poor recent graduate sitting in a cubicle who writes congratulations, you've been pre-approved over and over again, but have come a long way from there. So let's jump right in.
Let's do it.
So just at a high level, the situation, live speakers at events, obviously is what we're here to talk about today. In our agency world, we rely on speaker bureaus such as BigSpeak to keep up to speed on what's out there, who's driving the most impact, cast as wide a net as possible in speaker searches in service of our clients. And we serve as a conduit between our clients and speaker sourcing professionals like Ken and his team who bring that talent to the table. So, really the longer term the relationships, the better everyone gets to know one another and what all parties are looking for, the more efficient the process becomes and really the better the outcome. Because really matching a speaker to the client's events, content, theme, key messages is as much of an art as a science. There's a lot of people skills involved there. So I think as we all know, keynote headliners can be expensive, and one of the factors that have the biggest impact on attendance and pre-event excitement, obviously. So it's hugely important to get that right, especially in the generally speaking year-over-year world of events, where if you don't, you've got, it's another year before you get a crack at it.
Yeah, and really the mission of what speakers bureaus do and what BigSpeak does is to connect the keynote speaker with the audience and really engineering it from a point of view of who's in the audience, what's the theme of the event, who's really going to be a good match and deliver something.
Fantastic. So what is that challenge? Again, when one of our clients is investing in a speaker, and when a speakers bureau such as BigSpeak is advocating on behalf of their client, the speaker, and guaranteeing that return, that ROI just has to be there, simply put. In theory, professional keynote speakers just innately should offer a great return on investment. You have thought leaders who spark new ideas and fresh thinking within your attendee community. Industry experts can provide insights into new trends and best practices, and luminary speakers can sort of raise the level of discourse at your event, TED Talk style, if you will, and create that memorable, emotional impact that your attendees are going to carry forward with them. But in the most basic sort of bottom line dollars and cents way, we were interested in drilling into, can you demonstrate a hard return on that investment?
And that's the question really that Opus and BigSpeak sought to answer. And anecdotally, we know companies are booking speakers and they're coming back and the industry keeps growing. Anecdotally, we believe, yes, there is an ROI. We wanted to quantify it, and that was really the purpose of the study. So what we really wanted to find out when we answer this kind of ROI question is, what are people defining as ROI? How are they measuring it? And what are they likely to do in the future in terms of calculating the ROI and making those investments? So we went out, we looked at event planner blogs, event planner pages on social media. We asked some of our key clients, we worked with the marketing teams at Opus and BigSpeak to do this. And at the very least, what we came up with is that people feel that they're at least breaking even and or doing better than that. And we'll look at the data a little bit later, but resoundingly, about 87% of the participants felt like there is an ROI for bringing in speakers.
So from there, the team conducted a direct outreach study seeking to quantify that ROI of a paid speaker. And maybe you can speak to this a little bit, but as we started unpacking this, we believe this is the first study of its kind for the industry. Is that right?
It is. And that's originally, when people started asking us this question, we first looked for any existing research. When we didn't find it, that's when we decided to work with Opus to create the survey and go through with the project.
And once we went out to the audience of event planning professionals that had engaged in one way, shape, or another with our organizations, it was obvious that there was just a real hunger for discussion around this topic. The survey itself saw a full 72% higher click-through rate than the industry baseline average that we hold ourselves accountable to. And I think even more remarkably, there was a 100% completion rate. So all those who clicked through completed the survey and wanted to offer their thoughts on this topic. So clearly there was an appetite for further discussion around this. Briefly, respondents consisted of 48% event organizers who are hands-on, day-to-day planning this stuff, 24% executives operating in this space, 8% third-party planners, 5% support staff, and then sort of a mixed bag of 15% in the remaining roles.
And most of the respondents were experienced event planners. We actually sent the survey out to 5,000 different people at different companies with different backgrounds. Some of them were some smaller companies all the way up to Fortune 1000, Fortune 100 companies globally. And about 62% of those participants, so a good portion of them, booked speakers maybe 1 to 3 events per year, and the remaining 39% were even more experienced. And I think it was about 19% booked speakers for 4 to 6 events, 6% booked 6 to 9 events, and over 13% were bringing in keynote speakers 10 or more times a year. So these folks responded to 4 key questions on paid speaker ROI, and let's take a look at the results.
So to start, we wanted to kind of set a baseline around just general impressions. A great speaker, obviously, as we all know, can infuse an event with energy and excitement and really form one of kind of the lasting, indelible memories for your attendees. But at the same time, I think we've also been there for that less ideal keynote situation where someone's just struggling up there, and we're all sort of discreetly checking our watches. So the first thing we wanted to do was to just gauge what the audience impressions were of the most recent speaker they saw, just to create that fundamental baseline of audience impressions.
And footnote, maybe discreetly checking watches or indiscreetly on their iPhones. That's when you know you're in the back of the room and the speaker's lost the audience for sure.
Yeah, you start getting that ghostly glow kind of coming up from everyone's chin.
Exactly. So the audience feedback we got from our participant respondents is nearly 80% had either an excellent or very good impression of their most recent keynote speaker that they had at an event. And if you actually include those who rank the experience as good, we're looking at more than a 92% satisfied attendee rate.
And so in general, when we think about gauging the value of an effective keynote speaker, we kind of think of it in three categories. So there's a big name, whether due to celebrity or industry status within the industry of your audience of attendees, can really help drive up attendance numbers. You have established subject matter experts who add credibility and gravitas to the proceedings. So, really true experts in their field that the audience responds to. And then at a broad level, an effective keynote can drive attendee engagement and offer emotional impact across an event. So that, in terms of a rule of thumb, is how we think about some of the areas that an effective keynoter can add value. But it was super validating to see those truisms really validated by the empirical data here.
Good point. And it's worth mentioning that it's possible some of these attendees may have qualified as speaker as a air quote good or very good, not necessarily because of the quality of the speaker's performance, but maybe because of the star value, that they're starstruck, that they really wanted to see that person or, hear, kind of behind the scenes kind of thing.
So, kind of the meat of the question here, which types of speaker resulted in the best return? So I think, all of our bosses, when they're reading that carefully written justification letter seeking approval to attend an event, probably want to hear that we'll be learning from renowned industry experts, people who are going to give us actionable, cutting edge knowledge that we can take back and apply in our jobs. But at the same time, let's be honest, I think who among us hasn't gotten more than a little fired up at the thought of being in the room when a household name takes the stage, whether that's a celebrity or a famous politician. It's just exciting to be in the presence of a well-known speaker. So, but fundamentally, when you start looking at the numbers, we wanted to know if there's a demonstrable difference in return for one type of speaker versus another.
Exactly. The bottom line really is for the client that you're working with, that Opus is working with, or BigSpeak is working with, they need to go sit in front of their boss, and their boss wants to know, before I approve this PO, before we cut this check, how do we know it's worth it? And people are really putting kind of their reputation and their career sometimes on the line when they make these decisions. So when we asked the audience what kind of speaker or what type of speaker provided the best ROI, it kind of depended, right? So resoundingly, 46% of the participants said that a thought leader, so a best-selling author, somebody that has practical takeaways, that was the big majority of it. So we were a little bit surprised because we thought, for example, that big name headliners would have a bigger traction and bigger satisfaction. And that's where we had 13%. So the Magic Johnsons of the world, the Will Smiths, the Ashton Kutchers, the Mindy Kalings. And actually we like this, and this validates a lot of what BigSpeak is about, is that we like learning. We're a learning organization, and this demonstrated to us that almost half of the companies and participants are really going for these practical, actionable takeaways versus just, starstruck audiences.
Definitely. When you consider that 13% number too, we found that interesting. It's worth remembering that, big names also help drive one of the most concrete return metrics by creating the buzz that boosts attendance and the registration dollars that come with it. But at the same time, obviously, when you start thinking about budget-conscious event planners, they're also concerned about the investment part of that equation. So there's a balance to be struck there. It's interesting to note that investing in a thought leader to the tune of $20,000 or $30,000 rather than going with a low or sometimes even no-cost industry expert, nonetheless, is clearly the most well-regarded option. This suggests an appreciation for the value of investing in a professional speaker. So kind of that sweet spot between budget, but recognizing that someone who can really effectively deliver your message is worth an investment.
Exactly, and that's really how we define value. Something that provides takeaways and that is an appropriate budget, that provides a good value to the company, to the event, and to the audience. And it's also important when we're looking at these different types of speakers, what kind of event is it? So for example, if it's an internal event versus an external event, so internal, your own staff are there in the audience, thought leaders tend to resonate with those audiences better. These are the three things you need to do to demonstrate better emotional intelligence. This is how you talk about storytelling and emotionally connect with your clients. So that's one kind of ROI and one kind of an audience. External events, kind of like customer nurture track events, big conferences, big user conferences, summits, they're the ones that are tending to spend the bigger money on headliners. And then at ideas festivals like TED or South by Southwest, that's more of the curated speakers presenting content tied to that underlying theme, unique and fresh, not necessarily that kind of headliner.
Great. So an effective keynote speaker obviously should create impact in the room, reinforce key event messages, and offer that lasting post-event impact. So, in the room, but then also what do attendees take away with them? So calculating the value of an audience and its time is really a key part of that equation, and that took some math. So without further ado, let's kind of drill into some of those numbers about how we think about just the value of the room itself.
Sure, and this actually takes us to how we start to conceptualize. And we do this a lot when we're speaking with clients about their speaker budget. And it's interesting because the speaker budget a lot of times is an afterthought or just kind of a fraction of what's going on at the event. You've got the venue, you've got the AV company, the F&B. Some of these events, they're paying for people to travel, they're paying for their hotel. Sometimes there might be a big music act, like Metallica or something comes in, or Maroon 5, if you didn't happen to catch that during the Super Bowl. So when we're calculating the ROI, we've got, the salary investment. So you've got these people sitting in chairs for a couple days. What are they getting paid?
In terms of the attendees specifically,
exactly.
Right?
Not the people putting on the event, but those couple hundred to 1,000 to 10,000 people. Those people aren't working. Maybe they're on their iPhones during breaks, catching up on emails, but they're not working. So that also kind of results in a productivity impact. So what we're really looking at when we do this and when we're talking about ROI is, what's that really actual hard cost of the people's time and their opportunity and their lost costs.
So Ken, I'm curious to know this concept of kind of your overall total people investment. When you're out there speaking with some of your clients and sourcing speakers, how much do people think about things in this way in terms of the opportunity cost for the people in the room versus just the hard dollars of the event itself?
That's a really interesting question. Not often enough. And it's usually us at BigSpeak who are advancing that conversation. A lot of times the people that we're dealing with and working with and partnering with have, kind of marching orders from somebody else. Hey, we're having this event and we need you to fill this time with this kind of a speaker. And then we have a very selective process that we call expert select. Learning about who's in the audience, what are the themes of the event, what are the key takeaways, what are some challenges going on at the organization. And as we're doing all of this, they're just very focused on who have you got, how much is it? And what we try to do is zoom back out and take a look at this. Tell us more about the event. How many days is it? What are you investing in it? So what's interesting is sometimes these companies are easily spending $1 million and they want to bring in a speaker for $10,000.
Right.
So part of our job is to educate them. Hey, you're putting this whole event on. And Amy Eddy from our team kind of pioneered this with us about maybe 4 years ago. And she was speaking with a speaker who the client was putting on $1 million event and they had a $10,000 budget. And Amy started asking them, hey, I'm just curious, what are you paying for the venue? What are you paying to bring people in? And when they had that context around it, it made more sense to spend $30,000 to $40,000 to bring in a good thought leader.
Well, and that's such a, it's worth noting that, to your point, while that cost of the top-notch keynote speaker, when you see it on paper and you're in that sourcing and planning process, you're very focused on the details, that it can feel like a lot. But then when you weigh it against kind of the overall budget, yeah, exactly. It's like, how are you valuing where your budgetary spend is going? And for those of you on the line, if you're joining us for this webinar, you're obviously aware of the costs associated with producing events, which can be high. It adds up, as we all know. But that impact can be just as huge for the dollars spent. So, again, coming back to that sort of impression of your last speaker, just think about the last sort of major event you attended, where general session either kind of inspired you and left you leaving the room feeling elated and ready to go, or if it just sort of fell a little flat. And I think everyone will kind of know what that feels like.
And one kind of caveat to what we just said is that a lot of times event planners have a specific budget. They're not the ones that set it. There's a committee, there's a VP or a C-level person who said, you've got $30K to spend or you've got $10K to spend. So also working with that. And if that is the case, even though it's $1 million event and even if it's a $10,000 budget, also helping that person and empathizing that it's probably out of their control.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and if that's, if this is what it is, let's work together to deliver the highest impact we can for whatever your budget is.
Exactly. So then we started kind of looking at what is the post-event ROI that a speaker typically generates. And we were really happy with what we saw. And overall, 87% of the respondents perceived ROI to bring in a speaker. So that goes anywhere from neutral. And neutral is, hey, we spent $1, we made $1, or we broke even, all the way up to people saying, hey, it's substantial. And what I really like is kind of a moderate category. So it's 31% of the people see, better than a neutral ROI. And remember that depending on what kind of event it is, so if you're doing a customer conference, you're selling tickets, you're getting lifts in ticket sales. So sometimes the ROI isn't just there the day of the event, it's before the event as you're selling the tickets. Other companies and other participants are measuring the ROI of after the event, how many needles got moved and how did we lock in the learning.
Yeah, I mean, that's such a great point. Ken and I were just talking about this yesterday, that one of the most exciting times when you're sort of in that audience acquisition and recruitment phase is when you start getting those speaker contracts booked and you're able to start going external with that message, because it really is a pivot point just in terms of generating interest in your event and really, seeing the corresponding registration boost. So that's always exciting.
And that's a good segue into how long are the speaker's key points reinforced by company leadership. And this was a big initiative our founder and CEO, Jonathan, always talks about, hey, we don't want to just go out and sprinkle the Kool-Aid. We want people to learn something. We want them to have a takeaway. And there's a lot of research out there already that if it's just a keynote speech, that within, I think it's something in the magnitude of maybe 4 months, that 4 months later, most people are only memorizing or putting into play just about 5 to 6% of what that speaker, they know the speaker's name, they remember the title of their book, and maybe a funny story about their dog. But they can't explain to you what the takeaways are. So a big part of this reinforcement in the ROI is follow on, leadership of the company, following up with the employees. Hey, this is what we heard about, these are the things, doing some coaching, doing some follow-on work and things like that. And then another key discovery was how important it is for the organization to have kind of a defined plan for reinforcing the speaker's key message post-event. And close to half the respondents felt that a speaker's message was strategically enforced within the organization for 3 or more weeks. And this is a shift to the prior research that was out there.
Mm-hmm. And, as we kind of look at these results, the one thing that stood out to me was that for that truly long-lasting strategic message reinforcement, further boosting that value that an organization is getting from its initial investment in the keynote speaker, as you look to those 27% of companies who see lasting effects for 5 weeks or more, I mean, that's, an entire month of your calendar year, if you're smart about how you're reinforcing the message, that you're continuing to derive value out of that investment in your speaker.
This is really encouraging to see. And as I mentioned, the prior research is that there wasn't as much of this reinforcement of learning, but seeing this shift, especially when leadership of the company locks in that learning and reinforces the learning is really wonderful.
Yeah, for sure. And I do want to call out too that it's important to note that sort of stickiness factor, it never happens by accident. So, smart, savvy companies have the specific sort of predefined communication plan to keep those messages alive internally and externally as a follow-on to the event. So, you've invested in the speaker, you've worked with them to make sure they're reinforcing your key messages, and then you have that post-event, follow-up kind of nurture plan for both your internal and external audiences to continue reinforcing that message.
Exactly, and that's working with an Opus or a BigSpeak or the two together. the people who are on those calls that are designing these experiences are setting that up with the speaker and with the client. So we're doing that before the event actually happens. So when we're on those pre-calls, we're talking to the speaker, Mike, what do we do as an organization to lock in this learning and really continue this post-event, and getting some coaching, some check-ins, and some talking points on that?
Yeah, absolutely. So as we're kind of coming down the stretch here, a few things to just bear in mind. So what are some of the key takeaways from all of this research and learning? And what are some factors to bear in mind when it comes time for your next speaker search? And I think all of us have got one somewhere on the horizon coming up.
Agree. Wrapping up here, this is a kind of a summary of what we've just been talking about. And I think the big takeaways for our audience today is that thought leaders and authors really offer that great value. It's that nice overlay of something practical. And these are entertaining, great folks, that have good stories, that are funny, that really engage with the audience, who also give the practical takeaways, and that are in a good value range. So in that probably 20 to 30K range, and sometimes even in a 10 to 20K range. So that feels like a really good spot. And I think that's a good takeaway for our group today to do. Always work with good agencies like Opus, like BigSpeak, with professionals who understand who's in the audience and matching the right speaker, not just doing kind of a top 3 list that other companies just send out, hey, we think this person's a fit. So don't do the square peg round hole. And then bear the overall investment in the event in mind, not just the speaker. And if you are spending, for example, $1 million, maybe try to get that speaker budget up so that it's appropriate and it's somebody who's going to really connect with the audience.
Yeah, for sure. And just kind of wrapping up in conclusion here, we're proud of what we believe to be an industry-first report on the ROI of paid speakers, but fair to say to everyone in attendance today, this really is just the beginning. There's more research to come. Just interested in subsequently conclusively determining that relationship between variables such as cost, speaker type, and ROI. But in general, kind of following on to this original research, we're just incredibly encouraged to see that these keynote speakers are not, it's not merely a luxury or a nice to have or kind of a splashy name, but instead it's a true investment with a potentially significant return for the savvy organizations who have events as a key part of their marketing mix. So thank you, everyone. We have a few minutes left here. We'll turn it over to our Q&A section here. You can submit through the Q&A field within the webinar platform here. I will hand it over to our colleague, Sydney, who is going to help facilitate those questions coming in.
Hi, everyone. Just saw one question come through just now, and that is, are there any best practices or rules of thumb as far as percentage of event spend that should go to your speaker fee?
Gosh, that is such a good question, and this is everyone's favorite answer, right? But I'm going to have to say that it really depends. To the example Ken provided before, maybe it is a $1 million event and you have a hard $10,000 speaker budget, and that kind of is what it is. But really, by and large, I think that the best advice we can give is to start with your audience specifics, your goals, your key messages, and let that drive the decision and the investment, as opposed to kind of letting emotion enter into it a little bit or chasing a name.
Good point. Agree 100% with that.
Oh, one more just came through. What are ways to research whether a speaker fee is reasonable or worth it?
That's my favorite question. Of course, call the Speakers Bureau, and specifically BigSpeak. Outside of that, shameless plug, a lot of folks we work with, we're in a very transparent world. There's a lot of information on the internet, and there are actually websites, and I caution everyone to be mindful when you're looking at these things. There are websites that will give you fee ranges of speakers. Typically, they're very off. They're either very low or very high. So it's always good to work with a professional, and it's good to partner with the Speakers Bureau and also work with an agency like Opus, who does this all the time, and they have a pretty good idea of what a good speaker would cost. And we've outlined here, hey, a good thought leader, New York Times bestseller, maybe not Malcolm Gladwell, somebody like James Clear, like Matthew Lunn, those kind of folks, Robin Benincasa, all have best-selling books, all great, knock it out of the park speakers in the range of 20 to 30K. James is a little bit more than that, but those are the kind of people that you can get for good money, and these are good bracket ranges, and folks can probably get this slide deck, or if they have any questions, they can email us too.
For sure, and that's just to add on to that a little bit too. I think one of the hidden values about working with a speaker bureau is this really is a relationship-based business. And Ken, you'll recall there was an opportunity a few months back where there was a speaker that we were interested in and thought that was just like well outside of our budget. But turns out like, hey, you had a relationship there. You knew that she was in such and such a town and had some free time in between, so there might be an opportunity. So you never know when there might be a chance to bring in talent that may be above what you think you're able to acquire.
Great point.
I think we have time for one more quick question that came through, and that is, if a client doesn't yet know what they're looking for in a speaker, how do you help them make some initial decisions to narrow the search?
That is a great question. I think for me, and to come back to this point, which really is key, it comes back to keeping your eyes on your audience needs and what are you trying to accomplish here? What type of event is it? What key messages are you trying to reinforce? What are your strategic event goals? And let that inform the search, because you go to any speaker bureau site and it can almost be overwhelming. There's just so many speakers and so many different directions you go that you really need to kind of start with those strategic goals and your audience needs and let that drive the search and really narrow your focus. Would you agree, Ken?
Agree 100%. And we call those usually an open canvas search. So maybe about a third of the events and the inquiries we work on read their article, saw their TED Talk, other things like that. Other stuff is that they have a theme, they have a budget, they're looking for speakers on leadership, innovation, but they haven't really drilled down. And then about the other third is we're putting on an event. We are looking for an entertaining speaker who can connect with the audience, and we start asking questions. And even though folks don't know, they kind of do know. And that's the role of Opus or BigSpeak, to ask those deepening questions and really get to it, and with a very high success rate. So usually, even at the beginning of that call or the beginning of that meeting, if the person who's securing the speaker doesn't exactly know who they want, usually by the end of a good call, we can narrow that down for them.
Fantastic. Well, thank you once again, everyone, for joining today. Obviously, if you've sat in with us today, this is a topic that interests you, and as we said, we're excited to continue drilling into this going forward. We are a bit past our time, and it looks like there were some additional questions, but just for everyone's knowledge, we'll be sending out a follow-up email after today's session, which will include some contact information. So if you had a question you weren't able to get answered today, we'd be more than happy to follow up with you directly. So thank you again, everyone, for your time, and have a great weekend.
Thanks all.